This is your daily dose of all things royal.
Social media companies are able to exert this outsized influence, providing opportunities and encouragement to people who want to do really terrible things, whether that's commit mass shootings, or whether it's sexual exploitation, or whether it is to try to dehumanize an entire population.
We're incentivizing the worst of human nature. There is no longer a vision of what democracy should look like, or at the very least, the tech platforms have reshaped it and destroyed it by operating on what people all around the world have in common: our biology, anger, hate, conspiracy theories, us against them, the in-group or the out-group.
Technology companies are playing a huge role in encouraging that type of harm, and they're making money off of it.
The research that CCDH has done on COVID and other online abuse has been really eye-opening. I think it's really important that we understand how disinformation is generated online, what the motivations are, and then figure out how to combat it, because the medical and public health community is ill-equipped on our own to be able to handle this.
What we find is that people do not like to find out they're being manipulated. And if you can teach them about how that manipulation works, they're more resilient to it.
The concrete research that CCDH is coming in with is really adding to the value of the conversation, helps us bring raw data and numbers to the companies. And they're gonna quibble with it because they're a bunch of fraudsters, but at least we have a record of what they're not living up to, what they're failing at.
CCDH has done a wonderful job of documenting the extent of online harms, whether it's anti-vax material, or it's anti-Semitism, or it's the Great Replacement. But it's more than that. CCDH is also involved in policy debates and working with policymakers, both here in the United States and in the UK.
When I sat in the House of Commons and we had the debate on the online safety bill, CCDH's work was quoted by both the government ministers that spoke in that debate. It shows that, the transparency reports of the tech companies, the promises they give in public, do not tally with the real lived experience of people online, and CCDH is exposing that.
The system is not transparent. The only people that really know what is going on these digital platforms is the platforms themselves. But CCDH is leading the way in terms of shedding a light on what is going on.
Governments need to start to act. Self-regulation has obviously failed. When we get in our cars today, we know that the seatbelts will be embedded and that there will be airbags and anti-lock brakes. Because of technological exceptionalism, we haven't required any of those safety protections for the technology platforms.
It's going to take all of us in the nonprofit space to follow the kinds of things that CCDH is doing. The number of hate groups has been increasing pretty rapidly and frighteningly really since 2000. So in the 1990s, the number of hate groups sort of bounced around 450, a little up, a little down every year. And then in 2000, we started to see a sustained rise, which ultimately led to a doubling of groups. And what's interesting about this is that the year 2000 is the year that the Census Bureau told Americans that white people would become a minority in the future, in 2042. And a lot of hate groups all of a sudden started to, begin to recruit. White supremacists commit far more acts of domestic terrorism in the United States than radical Islamists, for example. These groups have seen their numbers increase, particularly since Donald Trump started campaigning. There are other organizations that call themselves the alt-right that literally didn't exist 2 years ago. And a lot of the ferment and activity, the protests, the rallies and whatnot, are circulated around the alt-right groups right now. In particular, groups that attach themselves directly to Donald Trump's campaign have seen their ranks grow. So we've got a hate problem larger than we've ever had.
Unsealed a case against the former chief financial officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Can you please speak a little bit about what you've learned as part of that investigation and if we should expect more charges?
So yes, today, my understanding is today there was an arrest made and there is a new indictment that includes the former CFO of SPLC. I don't have any comments about whether, we've said from the beginning, everybody, not just me, but anybody who's talked about this case, like virtually every criminal case, the fact that an indictment is returned doesn't end the investigation. It's just part of the investigation in most cases, which is certainly true in this case. I think as alleged in the indictment, this individual participated in the scheme as alleged. I believe she was part of the effort to open bank accounts in completely fictitious companies' names and make payments to individuals for reasons that were not that were not accurate as described. But I don't have. I think the indictment was unsealed this morning. I believe it was unsealed this morning. I think the arrest was this morning. I don't have anything to say beyond that, except to say that this is exactly what we said would happen in a case like this, which is that our investigators and the U.S. attorneys and the agents working the case can keep on working it even after the initial indictment.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got our second panel. This one's on bad platforms. Chairing it, we've got the two co-chairs, Heidi Beirich from the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, Jessica Gonzalez from Free Press. We are absolutely delighted to have Rashad Robinson from Color of Change, Sophie Zhang, who is a brave whistleblower from Facebook, Angelo Carusoni from Media Matters for America, and Dr. Marianne Franks, an academic from the University of Florida.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heidi Beirich. I'm the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, and along with my colleague here, Jessica Gonzalez, a co-chair and a co-founder of Change the Terms, a coalition of dozens of civil rights groups that have been working on issues related to hateful online content since, I guess, 2018, 2017, long time at this work. Our topic today is bad platforms, which I think is horrifically timely after what we just saw this past weekend in Buffalo, where what seemed to be a quick move by the company Twitch to remove this horrific video turned out not to be such a wonderful situation, with Facebook allowing the shooter's video to proliferate more than 1 million times, stills found on Twitter. And these are all companies that are part of the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, so in theory for some time now have had a hashing system to track that kind of information. And Discord, also a member of the GIFCT, is where the attack was basically laid out for everybody to find. Google Drive is where his document was hosted. So this is an important topic to be talking about in the wake of this weekend's tragedy. So with that, I will hand it to Jessica.
Thank you, Heidi. Well, we certainly had a sobering morning. I've been working on anti-hate work since we were doing anti-hate on the radio work. And yet today we're at a really tough moment. And I will say, the people who are sitting here at this table, despite all this, give me great hope.
Organization was indicted earlier today. She turned herself into authorities in California. The SPLC is accused of funneling donor money to some of the groups it aimed to stop, like the Ku Klux Klan. Now, her name is Heidi Beirich. She was scheduled to be in court in California in the past hour, accused of helping funnel more than $1 million in donor funds to a confidential informant to infiltrate a neo-Nazi organization. Authorities say she was in a romantic relationship with that source. DOJ indicted the SPLC earlier this year. We're told more charges are possible in this ongoing investigation. Right.
Yeah, we'll follow that. David, thanks.
We will, thanks.
We have some of the smartest thinkers in the United States in terms of data science, campaign, organizing, and policy.
The Boston Globe piece was a thought experiment that I was invited to contribute to, and so I was asked if we were rethinking the Constitution, what are some of the ways we could rethink it? So that is the context of that op-ed.
Okay, I think it's interesting that of all the people that could have been selected to come testify about the dangers of limiting free speech and censorship, my colleagues on the other side chose someone who believes that the First Amendment is essentially a white male fetish. Thankfully, that is not in the mainstream, and that we believe that the ability to speak your mind, to express yourself, is protected by the First Amendment, is a God-given right. The government doesn't confer that upon anyone. It's our job to protect it. And I think the dangers that we've seen from the government outsourcing what it can't do itself have been laid out bare.
So I'm going to ask the first question. It's going to be directed to Rashad. And if you want to add, Rashad, thoughts about what happened this weekend, that'd also be really helpful. So there's overwhelming evidence that structures and design choices of the social media platforms, search engines, are failing and they're harming users. We've heard all about that all today. You know, this has been brought to the attention of big tech through many forums, Color of Change work, obviously, Rashad personally doing outreach, through the Black Lives Matter movement in various ways. And we're interested in hearing about the insights you can provide about how you've worked to negotiate, for example, with the leadership, Zuckerberg or Sandberg, directly at Facebook, or any other similar examples you want to bring up, and what's been successful, what hasn't. And you know, if you have any thoughts on the current regulatory environment here in the U.S. or what needs to be done.
Well, first of all, well, thank you all. It's great to be with you all here. And that was such an easy question, no multiple parts or anything, so I appreciate me getting started with that. And I do want to start off by saying something about racial terror and racial violence and the ways in which it is used to both send a very clear message about hierarchy in this country and to stifle and silence our ability to fight for a better tomorrow. The ways in which it is deployed and the confluence of the ways in which technology and sort of this new era we're in only supercharge it is obviously why Color of Change is in this work. I don't, though, want us to think that just because we are now seeing these things in different ways and we are experiencing them on our screens, that we just don't have a history structured around racial violence in this country against Black people, against Indigenous people, against immigrants, and that is sort of baked in. And so then when you add unaccountable tools and unaccountable technology, it only sort of exacerbates that and gives more energy to animate more to happen. So I think that's important. The question about the technology platforms, I think, is an important one because I think we just have to get very clear that self-regulated companies are unregulated companies. And as much as we have done our best to go back and forth with the big tech platforms, we have, Jessica and I have been part of boycotts of these platforms. We have, I have spent a lot of personal time going back and forth, meetings, sitting across the table, actually winning things out the meeting that we were able to announce and changes that they said they were going to make, only to watch when powerful people broke the four corners of those rules, whether it be Donald Trump or someone else, they decide whether or not they're going to enforce it, is an example of sort of the state that we're in, where we can't be in a place where we're begging billionaires to protect our civil rights, or protect our human rights, and hoping that they will do that over the interest of growth and profit. And so the idea that we can negotiate in ways that are actually going to be real, I think we have to just be very realistic about the limitations. Now, in the march towards an election or the march towards a census, sometimes you have to do the best you possibly can to try to get some rules. And I've sat across from Mark Zuckerberg in a room while we were trying to get him to agree to some new rules around the suppression of the census that was happening on his platform, and he, in that conversation, brought up a young, undocumented woman that he was mentoring in East Palo Alto, and used her story of being uncomfortable about what happened around DACA as a way to say, well, I don't want to prevent her from speaking out against the census on my platform. And I was wondering what other policies he runs by her before he makes them, and if he was paying her for her expertise. We could probably think of the answer to that, but I say that to say that if she wasn't putting tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars behind her post, her friends probably wouldn't even see the post, or all of her friends wouldn't see the post. And so this sort of the ways in which every solution becomes problematized by a platform that is not actually interested in solutions. And so here's what we have to recognize as our path forward, that we have to hold the line between real solutions and fake solutions. It's not enough to say regulation, because they will say that they are for regulation. And then, just like every other industry, will then put forward regulations that actually suit their interest. I have been in a number of meetings and engagements with researchers sponsored and funded by the platforms right now who are driving a narrative about that this is a demand-side problem, and that people want this kind of content, and if we can't cut them off from the things that they want, as if that would be sort of the thing we said about food deserts in this country, or guns, or anything else. And so then the final thing I'll just say about holding the line between real solutions and fake solutions, and tying it back to Buffalo, is that I fundamentally believe, particularly in the United States, that racial justice is our strongest force multiplier to win. And what do I mean by that? I mean that racial justice is not only one of the most powerful forces we have in this country to actually mobilize people to action. Think about the summer of 2020 in this country, when so much was happening and many people thought the best we could do in terms of activism was clap outside of windows or uplift investigating journalism. It was racial justice that drove people to the streets, made people raise their voice, led to upticks in voter registration. It was multiracial coalitions of people that came together and said enough is enough and started demanding more. And so we actually have to fuel and engage and empower a base, because we will always lose in the back rooms if we don't have people lined up at the front door. And the final thing about racial justice is that it's not just our most powerful force multiplier to actually get people to action. It is also the most powerful lens for us to actually use to determine if our solutions are real. Because the people most impacted by these problems are the people who have been traditionally targeted, exploited, and harmed by so many other systems in this country. These are not vulnerable communities. These are targeted communities. These are not weak communities. These are communities that have shown some of the most resilience under so many attacks for generations upon generations and are still here. And so the idea of racial justice, not just as an outcome, not just as charity, but racial justice as strategy, has to be part of how we actually do this work if we both want to win and get more people invested in holding folks accountable, and if we want to have the correct lens by which to judge if our solutions actually meet the bar to be real solutions that impact our society in the ways that we want it to.
So Dr. Marianne Franks, next question is for you. From these experiences that you've heard and the harms that have already been discussed by our speakers, it's clear that we don't, and this is also a topic that's been talked about all day today here as well. It's clear that the law that we have right now, the frameworks that we have, they're just, they're not doing anything. And as Rashad said, self-regulation is essentially no regulation. And we don't have a way to incentivize big tech to behave morally, because why would they, right? This is about money. So could you talk maybe a little bit about your research and your work around what needs to happen to sort of shift the behavior of big tech to get the reforms, that we need, talk a little bit about Section 230, how that relates to free speech and constitutional protections, privacy, and so on.
It's both my favorite and my least favorite topic. So I'll say a little bit about the organization that I work with, which is called the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, to point out and to highlight the frame that I think about when thinking about these issues, which is very much a civil rights approach. That what part of the problem is, whether it's a First Amendment free speech issue or a Section 230 issue, or the company saying, give the people what they want, so much of what happens around this debate is misunderstanding or deliberate misunderstandings or misperceptions of what freedom of speech is and what civil rights are. And so the focus that we try to bring to these issues is to say, as Rashad was saying, that when you let unfettered, incendiary threats, agendas of harassment and hatred and incitement to violence, when you let that flourish unchecked, when you monetize it, when you let people monetize it, you silence other people. So there's no sense in which one can honestly say that is a free speech protective position. It means you want freedom of speech for people who want to hurt other people, and you want those other targeted communities to be silenced and for their speech to be discounted or dismissed or excluded. So we very much try to put the focus on saying, here are what the civil rights implications are of inaction. And we focus not just on racial issues, but also on gender issues, sexual exploitation issues. A lot of our work is focused on what is sometimes referred to as revenge porn, also known as non-consensual pornography or image-based sexual abuse. So when we talk about the incentives, as many people have mentioned today, there are so many good efforts being made by nonprofits, by legislators, by policymakers about transparency, about tools, all the things that these companies can do. And let's be frank about how they have in fact used nonprofits and unpaid labor of those nonprofits to get better. They have outsourced their problems to nonprofits that are struggling for funds. And they've done that, and they've done it when it actually suits them in the public relations sphere to do so. So they can't really take credit for the modest gains that they have made because some have been made. There have been some victories that have been made. Nearly all of them can be traced back to a nonprofit or an activist or someone else outside of the company who was pushing for the change or inside the company trying to blow the whistle. So with that in mind, what do we do? What do we do about the fact that this is all up to the kind of largesse of billionaires? Part of the problem in the United States is going to be the Section 230 problem. There's no way around it. There are, of course, things that can be done outside of reforming Section 230, including enforcing and in times creating federal criminal legislation that does not apply for Section 230. There's a lot of things that the FTC could do. There are a lot of things that we could do in terms of trying to think more broadly about what an unfair and deceptive practice is, including maybe forcing social media companies to charge subscription fees so that they don't keep thinking they're getting something for free, because none of it is free. But Section 230 stands large over this problem because it essentially tells these companies, yeah, do all of those things that cost money and are going to hurt your bottom line, or don't. It doesn't matter. Because if in fact you do nothing, if in fact you monetize and you profit from terrible content that is illegal or unlawful or gets people killed, if you do all of that, no one's going to be able to sue you. So why bother, right? This is what companies have to think about. Do more transparency, be better about this, respect people's privacy. At the end of the day, if you don't change Section 230, effectively you're saying to the companies, do this or don't, just as you feel. So what is the problem? Section 230 has two major parts, really important to keep this in mind. And I want to underscore that because we've seen some really recent terrible attempts to answer the question, what should you do about Section 230 and big tech, namely Texas. All right, I could elaborate, but you all know what I mean. The problem with Section 230 is not a problem that every part of Section 230 has. Section 230 first part says you can't treat people as the publisher or speaker of other people's information. That's the problematic section. The part that's actually pretty good and actually does comport with the First Amendment is the second part that says, hey, to the extent that you take things down, you can't get in trouble for that. That's the genuine part of the law that actually is a good Samaritan law. It's the part that says if you try to help someone when you didn't have a legal obligation to do so, and you mess up, you didn't do it perfectly, you might have done something to the person unintentionally, you're not going to get sued. There is a piece of Section 230 that does it, and we need to leave it alone. The problem is going to be Section C1, the part that says you're basically off the hook if someone else on the platform did it. And that has to be changed, because it really is saying, if you're going to go back to the Good Samaritan analogy, we all know about the parable, right? So you've got the person who was set upon by robbers, left in a ditch for dead, beaten, all of his money has been stolen, and you've got these two people who are supposedly religious and moral people who walk by and do nothing, because it's not their problem. And then you've got the person who comes along and says, I feel sorry for this person. I'm going to tend to his wounds, and I am going to give him new clothes, and I'm going to give him money. Now imagine that what really Section 230 is doing by saying you're not responsible for things that you in fact have created or profit from. It's like saying, you, Good Samaritan, get to have a benefit, but so do you, the two people who passed by and did nothing, and so do you, robbers who beat the guy to begin with and took his money. And that can no longer be allowed to stand. And there's a fairly simple way of trying to affect this. There are two major problems with Section 230 that could be fixed. One is this free speech fetishism part. And that is the part where it says, any information provided by another content provider. This is the strangest euphemism one can think of, especially if what you mean to say is something supported by the First Amendment, and people do like to treat the Section 230 and the First Amendment as if they were interchangeable. They're not.
And the reason why we're having this hearing is that you have every right to express a point of view that I find abhorrent. I would hope that you would defend my right to do it, to have an opinion that you disagree with. But in the previous administration, if you dared to say that masks were somehow ineffective, or that you couldn't, the COVID vaccine didn't actually prevent transmission, all those things were true, but you were deplatformed. You were told you cannot speak. You cannot engage in dissent. That is a very un-American thing.
And that problem is that now companies are able to apply this preemptive immunity shield, not just when it comes to speech, and not just when it comes to speech that's actually protected by the First Amendment, which, despite the misinformation about the First Amendment that exists, is not everything. There are lots of things that you can't actually say, or that you can prohibit, restrict, or punish in many ways. So the amount of speech that's actually protected by the First Amendment is not what is captured by the word information. We need to get rid of the word information and put the word speech there, and note that it is only going to apply to speech acts that are plausibly protected by the First Amendment.
Dr. Franks, we're here to talk about free speech, correct?
Yes.
And we're here to talk about that being a fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Supreme Court plays an essential role in guaranteeing those constitutional rights, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about a tweet that you had in January 2024. The Supreme Court is a death panel. Is that your opinion?
In the context of this hearing, I think it is important to emphasize why I am here, which is to talk about my views on the First Amendment.
No, that's not what I ask you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
In the context of the cases that, not for free speech, no, that was not the context of that particular
Oh my goodness, okay. Well, it appears that you see the Supreme Court as a death panel, and that is some of the same rhetoric that unfortunately we continue to hear from some on the left who are trying to villainize justices who are doing their job. And I would like to just ask you, knowing that you have put this out, that the Supreme Court is a death panel, then let me ask you this. Do you look at Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson as members of the death panel, or is this just the justices that you disagree with?
I do not believe that the comments that you are referring to have relevance for this particular hearing, but here's what I will say. This is an administration that is threatening judges in addition to other people that he disagrees with. So yes,
Okay,
if your question is, do I defend judges?
I'm ready to
Am
move
I
on.
worried
Thank
about
you.
judges'
Ms.
security?
Hemingway,
I
I'd
am.
like to
I am
come
worried
to
about this
you.
administration essentially threatening those
want
judges.
to
So as I say, those are the things that we really have to address if we're going to talk about this larger interest of incentives, because as whistleblowers have shown us, as people from the inside now have documented for us, the kinds of content that these companies are naturally going to want to promote is the most contentious, most provocative, most harmful, high engagement as the euphemism goes, because that is what will get them profit. And if we're going to affect that incentive structure, we have to say it's not that profitable. And there are multiple ways of doing that and holding companies accountable. But one really important democratic American way of doing it is letting people sue when they've been harmed. Does that mean that the companies will suddenly become liable for every bad thing that a person does online? Of course not, because that's not how lawsuits work. What it means is that the courtroom door is not closed to someone who has a plausible claim of saying that there's a causal connection between what this platform knew about and let happen and harm that actually ultimately resulted. And it shouldn't be this hard. This deference and this preference that we've had for the tech industry has to end if we want to care about the kinds of issues that I think everybody in this room cares about and that lead directly to issues like the Buffalo shooting video. Because we all know this by now. This is not the first time this has happened. Facebook has been called to account before about how, there are live stream rapes and murders and assaults, and Facebook it says, what? We never thought someone would use the tool this way. Of course you thought about it, or if you didn't, you have no business running a business. Live streaming is what it is. It means that you cannot simply answer the problem by saying, more people needed to have flagged it earlier. And as someone else pointed out before, even Twitch, which got to it within 2 minutes, which is amazing actually, it's not fast enough because live streaming by its very nature means that people are going to use it to live stream assaults. They have ever since live streaming became a thing on social media. And the answer can't be for the public to do more or to hire more content moderators and pay them basically nothing and give them no mental health support for what they're looking at for however many hours a day. All of those things have to stop. So if we actually want to get at the heart of this, and noting too that the Buffalo shooting is not just about online. Of course, it's an echo of the mainstream media. It's an echo of, frankly, the Republican Party platform at this point. But if you're going to have to think about what it means to have a medium that encourages people to perform, the Buffalo Shooters Manifesto says, I thought about which platform to put this on, and I chose Twitch because somebody else had chosen Twitch before. And essentially because it's like a video game, right, to this person, and says, well, everybody can access this in real time, whereas Facebook, if I put it on some other platform, people might have to have an account. I want maximum audience for what I'm doing. In other words, the platform itself, the medium itself, is becoming part of the incentive and part of the performance. And this is not new. We know this now. We've known it, frankly, since the 1980s when white supremacists in the United States were getting online and getting really excited about the potential that the world of the internet had for them to unite white supremacists everywhere. And the idea that we didn't know in 1996 when Section 230 was written about these problems, some of us did know, and some people were talking about it, and yet they were ignored.
Their views, I think white supremacy is, one of the worst things mankind has come up with. Well, I can have a direct impact on these movements. And in the first year I was there, we did some very good work, myself and my colleagues, exposing anti-immigrant networks in the United States, some of which are still functioning today.
Facets of the censorship industrial complex, and learned that the State Department was one of the federal entities that was engaging with non-governmental organizations and other entities in big tech to market, promote, censorship tools and blacklists, which were then used against my publication, The Federalist, and also the Daily Wire. Publications that are a threat to the reigning orthodoxies are targeted by the censorship industrial complex. They want to exist without people pointing out their lies or the fact that there are really important debates. And so we are suing the State Department for that, and it is ongoing, this support of the censorship industrial complex. It is the bureaucracy, really, which perpetuates this even more than a particular administration.
Yes, and I think it's so important to note that robust, respectful, bipartisan debate adds to our freedom. helps to keep us free and allows that debate in the public square. And when you have an entity that becomes weaponized and shuts down one side of that speech and only allows speech with which it completely agrees, that is when you have that censorship writ large.
It was such a fraud.